Oh, la campana.
Es hora de rezar. Tenemos que irnos.
Lord Sattler.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Alright, this is Resident Evil 4 for the GameCube. I've been meaning to show this game for a long time, and I've actually had the idea in my head for a while, probably the past year, that I will show this one on Halloween. I mean, what perfect timing to show this game, which I've been wanting to show for a while, today on Halloween night.
Excuse me. Sir? I was wondering if you might recognize a girl in this photograph.
¿Qué carajo estás haciendo aquí? ¡Lárgate, cabrón!
Sorry to have bothered you.
Freeze! I said freeze!
So this game is called Resident Evil 4, but of course it's not the fourth game in the series. We had many before, Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Code Veronica. But this one takes place after Resident Evil 3, some 5 or 6 years after the Raccoon City incident. As you can see, we're playing as Leon S. Kennedy, and we've actually been sent into a rural village in Europe. They never say exactly where, but you kind of get the idea. You're in, maybe like a small village in Romania or something. And you have these really creepy towns, like, in this one it's not zombies. It's not these infested zombies that are trying to bite you. Instead you have, these crazy villagers that come at you in hordes, and they're throwing like pitchforks and stuff at you. So it's a little different there, and not only is it different there, but it's different in the controls. I mean, you can tell right away just by looking at this game, it's not using pre-rendered backgrounds like all the previous Resident Evil games except for Code Veronica. But Code Veronica still used the traditional Resident Evil controls. All the Resident Evil games had these fixed camera angles, and you rotated your character, and then up was always walk forward, even if your character was facing towards the screen, and even if he was walking towards the bottom of the screen while doing that, up was still walk forwards. Of course, a lot of people never got used to that idea, and a lot of people did not like Resident Evil games just because of the controls. So in this one, it's a full 3D game. You've got this over-the-shoulder perspective, which at the time was relatively new. I mean, we've seen it in games like Gears of War and Fallout 3 since, but I mean, at the time, I think it was a pretty new concept. But, more importantly, the controls play like a 3D shooter should. It's very similar to a first-person shooter. You have a laser sight on your gun, and you use the analog stick to aim. So basically, the controls are much more action-based now. And, if you didn't like the previous Resident Evil games because of the controls, and you looked past Resident Evil 4 because of that, definitely go back and check it out, because you're missing out on one of the best games because of what you think the controls are going to be like, and they are not like any of the previous Resident Evil games. Now the graphics in this game were absolutely mind-blowing when this game came out. Now, this game was originally intended to be a PlayStation 2 game. But basically, that game got scrapped, and and instead they started working on a Resident Evil game for the GameCube. Now, Capcom and Nintendo at the time were very close. They had a contract where so many Capcom games were going to be GameCube exclusives at the time. We saw Resident Evil Remake, we saw Resident Evil 0, and they were going to do an all-new Resident Evil game, but they wanted it to be different. They wanted it to be, full 3D and all this stuff. They knew it was going to be a different style of game. And they were also going to push the GameCube to its limits. They got the best programmers they had for the GameCube, and they basically said from day one, we're going to make this a GameCube exclusive, and we're going to push all the hardware of the GameCube to its limit. This game's going to be written for exclusively for the GameCube. It's going to look amazing, and well, quite frankly, it does. Just look at this game. This is one of the first games I remember playing where it didn't feel like I was in a, virtual world. It didn't feel like I was just looking at polygons and here's, an invisible border and here's where this virtual world ends. It just looks like it goes on forever. It looks like you're really in this world. And, this was not just the best looking GameCube game at the time. When this game came out January 2005, this was the best looking game on the consoles by a long shot. And I'm going to go so far as to say this was the best looking game overall. In 2005, this was the best looking game overall. Now there may have been some PC games that technically were better. They may have technically had higher resolution textures, or they may have technically had more polygons on the screen at a time. But you know what? They didn't have the art style that this game has. This game brought together amazing art style, the colors and the lighting and the design of all the areas that you're in comes together with the technology of the engine, and quite frankly, this was the best looking console game early 2005. Now, like I said, it was going to be a GameCube exclusive. At least everybody thought it was going to be a GameCube exclusive. But pretty much as this game was coming out, it was already announced that there was going to be a PlayStation 2 version. The PlayStation 2 version came out later that year, so this came out January 2005 for the GameCube, and it came out, I think it was November or December 2005 for the PlayStation 2, basically later that year. And a lot of people said it wasn't going to be possible to do this one on the PlayStation 2. Because it was written so well for the GameCube. Most games at the time were written for the PlayStation 2 first and then ported to the GameCube. But to have a game that was written, specifically for the GameCube's hardware, they said it wasn't going to be as good on the PlayStation 2, and, well, I guess they were right. Technically, some of the textures are a lower resolution on the PlayStation 2 version. If you put them side by side, yeah, the GameCube version does look a little bit better, but they did a pretty good job. I don't think most people would even notice the difference. Of course, they added a few extra levels, like you can play as Ada Wong on the PlayStation 2 version. And then in 2007, they also ported this game to the PC. So if you want to play this style of game with the mouse, it would still work pretty good because it basically, aims like a first-person shooter. So it'd be pretty good with the mouse too. They also ported this game to the Wii. Not a big fan of that concept. Basically they just took the game, which was already on the GameCube. Really nothing to port that over to the Wii. But of course, having the Wiimote controls was the big thing. Having this game with the Wiimote to aim. So it's also on the Wii. If you already had it on the GameCube, I don't think it's really worth buying for the Wii, but there's a lot of parts in this game that are like this. You have random buttons come up, you have to press the buttons, really quickly, or else you're not going to run fast enough and you get ran over. And then they throw like a random combination of buttons at you, and you have like a second to hit them, or else you'll die. So that's pretty cool. It's like in Shenmue when you have those quick time events, I think they called them. You'd be running down an alley and you'd have to dodge, random obstacles. And so there's a lot of that in this game. And then there's also a lot of these boss fights. I mean, you have these giant bosses. The bosses in this game, I mean, a lot of them are bigger than the screen, just these huge boss fights. But they mix in some of those quick time event style controls in the boss fights too. Like here, you'll get knocked off the boat. Every time you get knocked off the boat, you're not dead. You just have to swim back to the boat, and once again, you gotta, repetitively press the A button fast enough to swim back to the boat. And if you're not pressing it fast enough, you'll die. Another thing they changed in this game is the inventory. Not only can you hold a lot more items at once in this game, but a lot of the items that you have to buy. In the Resident Evil games, you found everything throughout the game. In this one, you still find a lot of health and ammo, but the guns, for the most part, you'll find a few of the guns around the game, but most of them you buy. So in this game, there's a merchant, and you can buy and sell items. There's a lot of items in this game that you find that are not really part of the storyline. They're just like treasures and stuff that you find, and basically you sell those to get money, and then you can buy stuff. You can buy weapons. You can buy weapon upgrades. I thought this area was cool too. You had the boxes hanging in the air, and you had to figure out that you could shoot them down to jump across them and progress through the game. Typical Resident Evil puzzles. If you're a fan of Resident Evil games, don't worry that they changed this one to 3D. A big part of the Resident Evil games is always the puzzles, and this game has all those similar Resident Evil style puzzles in it too. Now, of course, this game did really well in 2005. I mean, if any of you have missed this game, I don't know where you were if you were into games in 2005, but I mean, basically, you look at any review, this game got so many this game got 20, major game of the year and graphics of the year and all kinds of big awards like that. But look at the scores. I mean, IGN and Game Informer and Nintendo Power, pretty much every game review magazine gave this game 95%. And here's another boss fight. Once again, talking about the size of the bosses. I mean, this one is the size of the entire screen. And that was a common thing in this game. Big boss fights, a lot of those quick time event things mixed in. Typical Resident Evil puzzles. And then, just a lot of enemies. The hordes of villagers and the different weapons you can get to shoot them. It just makes for an overall really good game. It's a very long game. The typical Resident Evil games, maybe 3 hours, 3.5 hours. You could beat, pretty much the first 3 or 4 Resident Evil games. The first 3 on the PlayStation, I mean, you could beat those in 3 hours, really. This one, I beat this on the PlayStation 2 originally. Oddly enough, the first time I played this game was on the GameCube. When it came out, I rented this game on the GameCube, and I got maybe 4 hours into it. But then I ended up buying it on a PS2 because, I don't know, I got a used copy really cheap or something. So I actually beat it on the PlayStation 2. It took me almost 8 hours, if I remember correctly. So compared to all the other Resident Evil games, this one is way longer. So that's another good thing, too, I guess, is you'll get your money's worth out of this one.